Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our last session of this year's Delphi Classics in Praxis. It is a great pleasure to introduce this next panel, From Logos to Ethos, the Timeless Power of Ancient Greek Thought. Over the next 30 minutes, we will be joined by three exceptional scholars who will guide us through the enduring influence of ancient Greek philosophy, drama, and historical thought, not as distant echoes from the past, but as living forces that continue to shape how we think, speak, govern, and imagine our place in the world. In an age of rapid change and global complexity, the clarity, courage, and depth of ancient Greek thought provide practical, philosophical, and ethical tools for navigating the present and be stronger for the future. Let's now hear from our panelists as they bring ancient voices alive into contemporary conversation. So I have the pleasure to have Angie Hobbs with me. Please, Professor, introduce yourself and tell us why you are here.
Aristopoli, it's an enormous pleasure and honor to be here at this fantastic forum in literally my favorite place on earth. I could not be anywhere more beautiful and more spiritual for me. So I'm Angie Hobbs. I'm the Professor of the Public Understanding of Philosophy at the University of Sheffield. I initially trained as a classicist at Cambridge University, and I was there for many years. And then I moved into modern philosophy departments, but still specializing in ancient Greek philosophy and ethics and political theory. So with my academic hat on, I write books and I teach students in ancient Greek philosophy. However, I also have, and the majority of my contract is in the public understanding of philosophy, which I divide about 50-50 between media work in TV, radio, podcasts. I've had the pleasure of filming often in Greece and of working with Plato's Academy Center and many other Greek institutions. I also work with an increasing number of policy sectors. I'll just list a few here, but in what we're going to talk about, I'll give some more precise examples of the kinds of ways in which I apply ancient Greek philosophical ideas to contemporary problems. So I work with the British government in Downing Street. I work with the World Economic Forum and various business leaders, the British National Health Service. I work with the church, and I work with the military on occasion and various other sectors. So I made it up. I made up the job, and nobody's stopped me yet. No.
Professor Lamari, welcome. You are a professor of ancient Greek drama at the the Aristotelian University in Thessaloniki. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and about what you teach.
Thank you, Mrs. Manolidou. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Also, my thanks go to the organizers of this wonderful forum. So, as you heard, I am Anna Lamari. I teach ancient Greek literature at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and I mostly specialize in Greek drama, tragedy and comedy, and I have been working on Greek drama for the last 10 years. It is a very fascinating field to work in, and it is truly amazing how much relevant it can be today. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion about this very specific issue.
So am I. Professor Kremmydas, welcome to our panel. You're a professor of history in the Royal Holloway University in the UK. Please tell us a little bit more about your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Manolidou. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great joy and a privilege and an honor to be part of this panel and, of course, to participate in this wonderful forum, which, as I can see, is an impressive way of projecting Greek soft power to the rest of the world. Now, professionally, I am a professor of ancient Greek history. I'm a trained classicist. I trained here in Athens. University of Athens is my alma mater. And I went abroad, as many of many compatriots of similar age, went to the UK, studied classics at postgraduate level, specialized in ancient Greek history. And since 2005, I've been teaching at Royal Holloway, where I'm now professor and head of the Department of Classics. So my mission is to teach and inspire new classicists in the UK.
I hope you do that. So today we have a professor of philosophy, a professor of drama, and a professor of history in an economic forum. Huh? But it's in Delphi, so it can't be more suitable. So Professor Hobbs, please tell us a little bit about philosophy, about how is philosophy relevant today, but give us some tangible examples, not in theory, but because this is a practical conversation, it's a practical panel.
Of course. I'll very briefly select 3 examples to start with. So the first is the Socratic technique of questioning, the Elliniki, and then the development of that by Plato and Plato's dialogue form and his method of dialectic. Now, those methods I apply, I work a lot with schools, and I work with organizations which provide greater philosophy provision in primary and secondary schools in the UK. And we have found that applying these techniques of Socratic questioning and Platonic dialogue, it's just fantastic. It teaches critical thinking skills, it helps them spot fake news and all the other snake oil salesmen and women around the world at the moment. We're going to be hearing a lot more about that from my 2 distinguished colleagues. So that's great. I also apply that with the civil service in the UK. I was recently contacted by our Department for Work and Pensions, who wanted training in the Socratic technique of question and answer. They thought it would help them question their ministers better. Not to tell their ministers what to think, but to help their ministers discover what they thought and to think more clearly into. And I do that. I also use this technique in various work I do in interfaith fora and in faith secular fora. How we can question better, how we can debate better, how we can engage in more constructive and productive dialogue. The second thing I would mention is the work in ancient Greek philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, on the virtues. If that word is a bit scary, you just call them the moral and intellectual excellences. Not fashionable at the moment, but my goodness, we need them. My goodness, we need them. The human race has always known that to live together in any kind of peaceful way and productive way, we need the virtues. Look at what's happening in the world at the moment. If you don't have the virtues, you lose trust. And look what has happened with stock markets and bond markets recently through the lack of trust. There are real economic consequences to abandoning the virtues. Again, I particularly apply that in the work I do with various leaders, some in business, National Health Service leaders, and so on. I'm particularly interested in how leaders can lead better and apply the virtues in their leadership to inculcate a certain ecosystem in their organizations. The third thing I will briefly mention is the ancient Greek concept of eudaimonia, of flourishing or well-being, which I find a more practical, you're talking a praxis, a more practical concept than happiness. We can always try to flourish in the sense of actualizing, fulfilling our intellectual and moral capabilities and fulfilling our potential. We can always try to flourish even in periods when it's not so easy or even appropriate to feel happy or to feel pleasure. If you turn on the news and see Mariupol being destroyed or something and you laugh gaily, I mean, there's something really wrong with you. But there's rather than just being passive and putting your head in your hands, you can think, what can I do? How can I actualize my faculties to help the situation, even if only a little tiny bit? We've seen this concept of eudaimonia, of flourishing, really influential recently. The cognitive behavioral therapy movement have acknowledged that Stoicism, which of course arises out of Socratic and Platonic thinking, is absolutely at the core of the cognitive behavioral therapy movement. You can't always change events, you can change how you respond to events. So those are just 3 areas in which I find ancient Greek philosophy has real practical application to today's problems.
Thank you, Professor Hobbs. Professor Lamari, please tell us a little bit. Professor Hobbs mentioned before fake news. And do we see fake news in our everyday life? How does the study of drama, of Greek tragedy, help us distinguish fake news and how to deal with them? And were there fake news in antiquity?
Yes, certainly. Fake news were certainly a problem in antiquity, and we learn that by understanding how the same event is being portrayed in completely different ways in different sources. So what we are suffering from today was up to a very big extent exactly what our ancient Greek people were also suffering from. Drama included many ideas on how to have better judgment. If you think about it, everything that is being portrayed in drama is about characters that have good intentions but are led to flawed decisions. Think about Oedipus. Oedipus was somebody who tried to be a very good king, a very good husband, a very good father, but he had poor judgment. So this, of course, is because of fate, but Sophocles tried to show us that understanding the truth is actually what will lead you to better actions. And also, to follow up on what has been discussed in these panels these last few days. Almost in every panel, we hear that we live in a very challenging environment, that the global landscape is suffering from tectonic changes, and the question is how to address those changes. Well, it might sound strange, but ancient Greek drama has some answers on this, on how to address those big challenges. It is amazing how Greek theater transcends temporal boundaries, how Greek theater transcends cultural boundaries. Greek tragedy, more than any other form of art, perhaps, looks at human suffering directly in the face. It doesn't stare it down, but it stares right at it like no other genre. So the universality of its themes still speak to us today, are still relevant, and they can teach us how we have to address everyday challenges, especially in a period where those challenges are imminent, and especially in a period where we start to appreciate again the importance of ideas that maybe have been forgotten, like the importance of mental health.
Of course, so we will get to that.
We will get to that again.
We will get to that. And I would like for you to point out the etymology of the word drama.
Yes,
because it's not at all passive.
Okay, it's not at all passive. So the etymology of drama, of course, is the verb drao, which encompasses the very meaning of taking action. Of course, it reflects the fact that drama is also a mimetic genre and action was performed on stage, but also, if we read it differently, it can also give us a way to react to the adversities and act dynamically on it. So we have to really address the challenges, seek good judgment, and reflect on all those virtues that our ancestors showed that they are so important.
Professor Kremmydas, what does history, do we have actual history examples that show how we can address contemporary problems in the world, and can we learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. We can learn from history, and one of the lessons that history teaches us is that we do not learn from history. The problem with the study of ancient history is that you cannot use it as a manual where you can find straightforward solutions to problems. The study of Greek history is complex. It's fraught with difficulties. It's fraught with drama. And to take us all back to Thucydides, Thucydides talks about points at human nature. And he says that for as long as human nature is the same, certain things will happen and will happen again. And then he repeats that phrase later on in his description of the stasis. So he starts book one, he talks about human nature in his very generic introduction, and where he talks about his methodology, and then in a later book, book 3, where he talks about Corfu, Kerkyra, and the stasis, the civil war that engulfed and destroyed the city. He talks about stasis that will happen again as long as human nature remains the same. And Thucydides also points at all sorts of situations that we face in today's world. War. War, he says, is a cruel master, schoolmaster. He also talks about the way in which the public is often led to follow people with violent, I would add, toxic views, and oppose the ones who criticize them. Now, that's a very incisive look and insight into human psyche diachronically. Now, I'll give a contemporary example, a modern example. I'll take us back to Thucydides, and then I'll give another example from Thucydides, and I'll invite our audience to think about parallels and from our contemporary experience. So many people talk about the crisis of Western democracy, the crisis of American democracy. Now, Thucydides would shout from the rooftops of ancient Athens, do not follow the demagogues. Demagogues will ultimately destroy the city. Now, of course, there are all sorts of examples one could talk about the way in which demagogues led the city astray, the city of Athens astray, but I'll just mention one example, the example of the Sicilian expedition. Athens was at the height of its power. It was egged on by, let's say, demagogues who wanted to expand the imperium, the empire of the city, even further to the west, and they took the city over the cliff and into a spectacular disaster. One example, another example from Thucydides, if I may. 427, the city of Plata is destroyed after a prolonged campaign. Now, Sparta has the final say, and the city is eventually given to Argive settlers, then Megarian settlers, then it is razed to the ground. Now, think about that. Razed to the ground, and then the plots are given out, leased out to the Thebans, and a hotel, two-story hotel, is built with rooms facing around the building. Commercialization of land destroyed by war. I leave it to you to think about contemporary parallels.
Professor Hobbs, you spoke about eudaimonia and you spoke about the virtues. Yeah. And now I would like for you to tell us, how can these ideals be compared or contrasted with contemporary ethical considerations in artificial intelligence. As you see, every kid is in touch with artificial intelligence. They're connected to their phones, to their laptops, to their computers. And we don't have an ethical framework. Kids do not ask questions. They do not have the critical thinking values that you mentioned before. So how can we do something about that?
Thank you. I think that's such a good question. And throughout this forum, we've been hearing about AI in almost every panel. I think there's two ways of coming at this. So one, we can give the children themselves the tools to put these tools of AI into context. They need tools to deal with the tools and to make sense of them. But also, we adults need some understanding of the virtues if they're going to train AI systems properly in order to respond in virtually ethical ways. Otherwise, the human race really is going to be in huge trouble. Also, adults need to think hard about what they think a good life is, both for an individual and a community, because unless you've got that larger vision, you don't know what questions to ask your AI system. You don't know what kind of data to put in. You're not going to be able to use it to help us solve climate crisis problems, for instance, or defense problems, unless you yourself know the direction of travel. So we have to do thinking about what we think a good communal and individual life would look like and what kind of moral and intellectual excellences we need to cultivate and foster to get there before we can train and before the AI systems. Otherwise, they are going to lead us and not be led by us. So on all these different levels, absolutely crucial. So, and we can't run away from this. This is happening, but we start with the children, and we start young. We've been saying, all three of us are saying the same thing. We have got to inculcate critical thinking skills, language skills. We're here not just talking about Greek culture, fabulous though that is, but also the Greek language. And of course, learning the Greek language is part of the culture. And that kind of attention to words and what they mean and how we use them is critical. If I can just very briefly pick up something Christos said. So really interesting. There are so many parallels between Thucydides and Plato, in fact. It's 99% certain that Plato read Thucydides very deeply. Now, one of the most famous passages in Thucydides, as you all know, is in his description of in my English pronunciation, apologies, the Corcyraean, the Corfuan Civil War, is about how the Civil War corrupted language and subverted moral terms. And you get, caution is called cowardice, and we're seeing that now, aren't we? We're seeing empathy and compassion called weakness, and so on and so forth. It is, and Plato quotes that, I think, quotes that passage from Thucydides almost word for word in Republic Book 9, when he's talking about how democracies, can be subverted into tyrannies by opportunistic demagogues, again to pick up a theme. And the corruption starts with the corruption of language, so we need to train our children, that's a bad word. We need to encourage our children to pay real attention to language and words so that they can use AI systems as a helpful tool and not something that's going to wreck their lives. And so we can feed the right kind of data and questions into those AI systems so they work for us and we don't get destroyed by them.
Professor Lamari, to finish our discussion, because time is flying with you, we're talking about children, education. I have not found a single school that teaches drama in the way that is taught in the university, but in a more basic way. Would it be able for children to learn lessons from tragedy now, today, at the age of, let's say, primary school, 10, 12 years old? And would someone like you a professor at the university go to primary school once a month and teach ancient Greek drama to those kids?
Yes, of course, by all means, and I'm here, I'm available.
Remember that.
You can call me, I say it publicly. Yes, of course. If we think of early years education, if we think about what it is important at an early age for children, we think of empathy, we think of compassion, we think of good judgment. All these are ideas that can be inspired when we see a Greek play, when we read a tragic play. So the idea projected by tragedy, and I'm looking at the time, so I'm trying to be quick. The idea projected by tragedy, it is that we live, unfortunately, we live in a world of misery. We live in a world of challenges and adversities, and although we cannot control it, what we can control is the way we respond to it. So this could not feel more imminent today, and what ancient Greek tragedians are proposing is actually what modern psychology calls reframing. Reframing is a term that signifies the cognitive reappraisal of a situation. So changing our viewpoint in order to address life's many challenges. This is a typical therapeutical modality that it is followed in most places in the world. So ancient Greek tragedy can show us today how to think about loss, how to think about problems, how to survive, how to grow, and how to thrive. And I think this is a nice way to stop talking.
Very nicely said, and it's so necessary for our kids to learn all this. Professor Kremmydas, to finish up with you, tell us, what would your dream be for the kids in terms of learning history, ancient Greek? Because you also, you're a classical scholar.
Yeah.
So what is your dream? Can that be done in school at the very early stages?
Yeah, I hope that this dream becomes a reality soon. Starting from Greece, I would like to see school children inspired by their teachers who will have been inspired by their own university teachers and go out and pass on the flame. I believe very strongly that teachers need to be lifelong learners. And this is a very, very basic foundation on which to build.
Shouldn't we all be lifelong learners?
Absolutely. Now, in the UK, where I live and work, I'm seeing growth in the learning of languages, classical languages, including Greek. We have more students taking Greek and Latin than ever before. More students taking classical topics than ever before, and I'm proposing to the university that classical Greek and Latin is opened up to students from other disciplines, the mathematicians, the philosophers, the historians, the psychologists, so that they can read tragedy in Greek.
From the original. Thank you so much, the three of you. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. And this concludes this year's Delphi Classics in Praxis. I am grateful to the Delphi Economic Forum and Mr. Simeon Tomokos. I'm grateful to PeopleCert and Mr. Byron Nikolaidis, and to all our speakers and participants who helped bring the ancient world vividly into the present. I hope that the conversations that we shared have proved that classical Greek is a horizon offering insight, challenge, and purpose. So may the logos of our ancients continue to guide our ethos today. From the omphalos of the world, έχω δημήν μυρίας χάριτας, όψομεθ αλληλούς το επερχομένο έτη. Υγιένετε.